They say the richest people in the world are also the loudest. They scream through their diamonds, their fast cars, and their desperate need to be seen. But they are wrong. True wealth, the kind that can crush a life with a single phone call, is silent. It is as quiet as the snow falling over the Alpine peaks that surround the Fontaine Palace. It is as cold as the woman who owns it. My name is Claire, and for 21 years, I was a ghost in my own family. I was the daughter born from a mistake, the loose end in my father's carefully woven tapestry of greed. My father, Julian, is a man who thinks he can buy salvation with other people's money. When his investments began to bleed out, when the banks started circling like sharks, he remembered he had a daughter. He didn't see a child. He saw a transaction. He brought me here, to this fortress of marble and ice, to sell me to the highest bidder. But he made one fatal mistake. He thought Beatrice Fontaine was a woman who could be bought. The first time I saw her, I felt the air leave my lungs. We were standing in the grand foyer, a space so vast it felt like it was designed to make humans feel like ants. The floor was polished obsidian, reflecting the crystal chandeliers above, like stars in a dark lake. And then, there she was, Beatrice. She didn't walk. She materialized at the top of the grand staircase. She was wearing a tailored cream-colored suit that looked like it had been carved out of stone. Her hair was a flawless river of platinum, pulled back into a bun so tight it seemed to sharpen her already lethal cheekbones. Her eyes, ice blue and devoid of any warmth, swept over us. She didn't look at my father. She looked through him, but when her gaze landed on me, it stayed. It was a cold, clinical weight. I felt like a specimen pinned to a board. I felt seen for the first time in my life, and it terrified me. "Julian," she said. Her voice was a low, melodic rasp, like velvet wrapped around a blade. "I told you never to bring your filth into my home." My father laughed, that hollow, oily sound I had grown to hate. "Now, Beatrice, is that any way to speak to an old friend? This is Claire. She's a gift, a sign of my goodwill." Beatrice didn't flinch. She descended the stairs, her heels clicking rhythmically against the obsidian. The sound echoed like a heartbeat. She stopped inches away from me. She was taller than I expected. She smelled of expensive cedar wood and something metallic, like a fresh winter morning. She reached out with a gloved hand and tilted my chin up. Her touch was electric, despite the leather between us. "A gift," Beatrice repeated, her eyes searching mine. I didn't look down. I couldn't. "You bring me a girl with hay in her hair and fear in her eyes, and you call it goodwill. You are as pathetic as the day I divorced you, Julian." My father's smile faltered. "She's a Rossi, Beatrice. On her mother's side. You know the value of that bloodline. She's the key to the northern pastures. I thought we could collaborate." Beatrice let go of my chin. The warmth of her touch vanished, replaced by an even deeper chill. "In this palace, Julian, even the ghosts have to earn their keep. If you want me to house her while you flee your creditors, she will not be a guest. She will be a servant. She will start at the bottom, where she belongs." I saw the flash of anger in my father's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by desperation. He nodded. He left me there, without a word, without a look back. I was a sold asset. "Follow me, little ghost," Beatrice commanded, turning her back on me. She led me through corridors that felt like they belonged in a museum. Every painting, every vase, every rug whispered of centuries of power. We reached a small, windowless office, deep in the bowels of the hotel's administrative wing. "This is your world now," she said, gesturing to a desk piled high with dusty dossiers. "You will not sleep in the guest suites. You will not eat at the grand table. You will clean the archives. You will index the history of the families who stay here. You will learn the names of the people who think they own the world. Why? I found the courage to ask. My voice was a thin thread in the vast silence. Beatrice turned. The light from a single desk lamp caught the silver frames of her spectacles. Because, Claire, knowledge is the only thing that doesn't melt in the sun. Your father thinks you are a pawn. I want to see if you have the potential to be a player, or if you're just another beautiful mistake. The first week was a living hell. She was everywhere and nowhere. I would be scrubbing the floor of the wine cellar at 3 a.m., and I would feel her eyes on me from the shadows of the mezzanine. I would be filing papers until my fingers bled, and she would walk past, her silk suit rustling like a warning, never saying a word. She was the definition of a cold CEO. She didn't give instructions. She gave ultimatums. But I began to notice things. I noticed that she never slept. I noticed that she drank her coffee black at exactly 55 degrees. I noticed that when she looked at the portraits of her ancestors, there was a flicker of something that wasn't pride. It was resentment. One night, I was tasked with bringing a tray of tea to her private library. The room was dark, lit only by the dying embers in the hearth. Beatrice was sitting in a high-backed leather chair, her jacket removed, her silk shirt buttoned to the very top. She looked smaller in the shadows, less like a goddess, and more like a woman carrying the weight of a mountain. "Put it down and leave," she murmured. Her eyes were closed. I didn't leave. I stood there, watching the orange firelight dance across her platinum hair. "You're working on the mergers for the Eastern Wing," I said. Her eyes snapped open. The ice was back, sharper than ever. "Who gave you permission to look at my desk?" "I didn't have to look," I replied, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I indexed the contractors yesterday. The numbers don't add up. Your head of construction is overcharging you by 15%. He thinks you're too distracted by the gala to notice." The silence that followed was terrifying. Beatrice stood up, her regal height casting a long, jagged shadow against the book-lined walls. She walked toward me, stopping so close I could see the fine lines of exhaustion around her eyes. She reached out, her fingers just barely brushing the edge of my glasses. "You found a leak," she whispered. "My own auditors missed it. Why tell me? You could have used that as leverage to escape." "Because I don't want to escape," I said, looking directly into those ice-blue depths. "I want to be the one who finds the leaks. I want to be the one you can't categorize." A faint, dangerous smirk touched her lips. It wasn't a smile of kindness. It was a smile of recognition. "Very well, archivist. Tomorrow, we stop scrubbing floors. Tomorrow, I teach you how to dismantle a man's life without ever touching a weapon. Your father thinks he's coming back for his coronation. We are going to ensure he arrives at his funeral." I realized then that she wasn't just my mentor. She was my architect. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the dark. I was part of it. The transition from the archives to Beatrice's inner circle wasn't a promotion. It was an induction into a cold, beautiful war. She didn't give me a desk. She gave me a shadow. I was expected to be exactly 3 steps behind her at all times, a silent observer in meetings that determined the fate of thousands. I learned that Beatrice Fontaine didn't rule through fear, though fear was always present. She ruled through an absolute, crushing clarity. She saw the world as a series of structural weaknesses, and she had spent her life learning where to place the pressure. "Focus, Claire," she would say, without looking back as we swept through the marble corridors. "Don't listen to what the CEO of the Nordic Group is saying. Watch his hands. See how he adjusts his cufflink every time I mention the liability clause. He's lying about the offshore reserves. Record the timestamp. We'll use it at dinner." Her discipline was surgical. She expected me to dress in the same muted, expensive tones she wore. High collars, tailored lines, nothing that suggested vulnerability. She took my round, thin-framed glasses and replaced them with a set of custom-carved frames that made my eyes look sharper, older. She was stripping away the girl Julian had abandoned and forging something clinical in her place. There were no soft words, no good job or well done. If I succeeded, the reward was more work. If I failed, the reward was a silence so absolute, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Yet, in that silence, a strange, magnetic tension began to grow. It was a soft romanticism, born of proximity and shared secrets. One evening, we were in her private jet, flying over the jagged peaks of the Jura Mountains. The cabin was a sanctuary of cream leather and polished walnut. Beatrice was reviewing the final guest list for the winter gala, the event where my father expected to make his triumphant return. She looked exhausted, the blue light of her tablet reflecting in her ice-gray eyes. "He contacted the board today," she said, her voice dropping to that dangerous silk. "He's claiming he has a signed letter of intent from the Rossi estate. He's trying to force a hostile takeover of the northern wing. He thinks he's playing the long game." I stood by the window, watching the clouds glow like embers in the setting sun. "The Rossi estate doesn't exist anymore, Beatrice. My grandmother was the last one. The letter is a forgery." Beatrice set the tablet down and looked at me. Truly looked at me. "I know it's a forgery, Claire. I've known since the moment he stepped foot in my lobby. But in the world of high finance, a lie that everyone believes is as good as the truth. We don't need to prove it's a fake. We need to make the lie so expensive that it bankrupts him." She stood up and walked toward me. The cabin was small, and her presence always seemed to expand to fill every inch of it. She stopped close, so close I could smell the faint, sophisticated scent of her cedarwood perfume. She reached out, her fingers hovering near my shoulder, adjusting the lapel of my charcoal blazer. Her touch was brief, almost accidental, but it sent a jolt of electricity through my spine. "You're becoming quite the strategist," she whispered, "but you still have a tell. Your pulse jumps in your neck when you're angry. You must learn to turn that fire into ice. An empire cannot be ruled by someone who feels the heat." "I'm not trying to rule an empire," I replied, my voice steady despite the hammering in my chest. "I'm just trying to make sure he never hurts anyone again." Beatrice's expression softened, just for a heartbeat, a flicker of something human behind the corporate armor. Then, "You must be prepared to lose everything else. Power is a jealous mistress, Claire. It doesn't leave room for anything." Soft. She didn't move away. For a long, suspended moment, we stood there in the quiet hum of the jet, the world falling away beneath us. It was a soft, romantic tension, devoid of anything overt, built entirely on the weight of what went unsaid. She was the cold CEO, the Milfa of the Fontaine Empire, and I was the protégé she had pulled from the wreckage. We were a collision of two bloodlines, and the friction was starting to generate a heat neither of us could categorize. When we landed, the preparations for the gala reached a fever pitch. The Fontaine Palace was transformed into a dreamscape of silver and gold. Thousands of white lilies were flown in from the south, their scent thick and cloying in the grand ballroom. This was to be the site of our sweet revenge. My father arrived 2 days early, acting as if he already owned the keys to the palace. He walked the halls with a smug, oily confidence, stopping to flirt with the heiresses and whisper in the ears of the investors. He treated me like a servant whenever we crossed paths, barking orders for coffee or demanding I dry clean his dinner jacket. "Don't forget your place, Claire," he hissed at me in the hallway one afternoon, leaning in so close I could smell the expensive gin on his breath. "Beatrice is using you to get to me. When this deal is done, she'll toss you back into the gutter. But if you're smart, if you tell me what she's hiding in the 1888 ledger, I might find a place for you in my new firm. I looked at him through my new, sharp glasses. I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel the need to scream. I felt nothing but a cold, clinical curiosity. I saw the sweat on his upper lip. I saw the slight tremor in his hand. He wasn't a lion. He was a cornered rat trying to roar. "The 1888 ledger is exactly where it belongs, Father," I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "And as for my place, I think you'll find I've moved quite far from the gutter." I walked away before he could respond, the rhythmic click of my heels echoing Beatrice's own. I went straight to her office. She was standing by the window, watching the staff set up the lights in the garden. She didn't turn around when I entered. "He approached you," she stated. "He wants the ledger. He's desperate." Beatrice finally turned. She was wearing a deep navy silk blouse, buttoned to the chin, and her platinum hair was pulled back into a flawless, sharp bun. She looked like a judge preparing to pass sentence. "Then we give him exactly what he wants," she said, a faint, predatory smirk touching her lips. "We'll leave the safe in the study accidentally unlocked tonight. We'll place the forged Rossi documents right on top. Let him take the bait. Let him think he's won." "And the gala?" I asked. "The gala is the execution," Beatrice replied. She walked over to me and placed a hand on my arm. It was a solid, unyielding weight, a gesture of absolute trust. "Tonight, you are no longer the assistant. You are the partner. We are going to show the world that the Fontaine Empire doesn't just survive, it consumes." As I looked into her ice-blue eyes, I realized that Julian had no idea what was coming. He thought he was playing a game of chess against a woman. He didn't realize he was standing in the path of a glacier, and I was the one who had cleared the way. The night of the gala arrived with a crystalline beauty that felt like a funeral shroud for my father's ambitions. The Fontaine Palace was no longer a hotel. It was a theater of war dressed in silk and gold. This was the moment of sweet revenge, the climax of a month spent in the shadow of a woman who had taught me that the most effective weapons are the ones your enemy never sees coming. Beatrice was a masterpiece of cold dominance. She moved through the crowd like a glacier, slow, magnificent, and unstoppable. She wore a floor-length evening suit of midnight velvet, her collar high and stiff, her platinum hair shining under the crystal chandeliers. I stood at her side, no longer the shy girl Julian had abandoned, but a mirror of her cold discipline. My dark hair was pulled back, my eyes sharp behind my frames, my wine-red blazer, a statement of belonging. "Look at him," Beatrice murmured, her lips barely moving. My father was across the room, at the center of a circle of board members. He looked triumphant. He was laughing too loudly, a man who believed he had just stolen the keys to the kingdom. In his pocket was the 1888 ledger he had stolen from Beatrice's intentionally unlocked safe. He thought he had the forged Rossi signatures that would give him the northern wing and the leverage to oust Beatrice. "He's already spending the money," I said. "Let him enjoy his last hour of fantasy," Beatrice replied. Her hand found my shoulder, a firm, grounding touch that sent a pulse of heat through my veins. The higher he climbs, the more spectacular the fall. The clock struck 10. The music died. Beatrice stepped toward the marble dais. The silence that followed was absolute. My father stepped forward, his oily smile widening as he pulled the documents from his pocket. "Beatrice," he called out, "before you give your toast, perhaps we should discuss the future of the northern wing. I have the signed intent. The Rossi line is not extinct. I represent the true heir." A murmur went through the crowd. Beatrice didn't flinch. She didn't even look at the papers. She looked at me. "Is that so, Julian? It's funny you should mention the Rossi line, because, as my chief archivist has discovered, the lineage is indeed quite active, but it doesn't lead to your offshore accounts." She gestured for me to step forward. I swiped a tablet, projecting a high-resolution scan onto the wall behind us. "This," I said, my voice steady and melodic, mirroring Beatrice's authority, "is the verified 1888 protocol. If you look at the watermark on the papers in Julian's hand, you'll find they were printed 48 hours ago in this very hotel. It's a clumsy forgery, Julian, one that I personally tracked back to your laptop." My father's face turned a sickly shade of gray. "That's a lie. But more importantly," I interrupted, stepping closer to him, "you claimed the heir was a ghost. My grandmother, Giuliana Rossi, was the last to hold the title, and she left everything to her granddaughter, not to a son-in-law who tried to sell her legacy." I looked at the board members. "As of midnight, the northern pastures have been legally transferred into a trust, managed by Beatrice Fontaine. My father isn't an heir. He's a trespasser." The silence was heavier than the storm outside. Then, the whispers began. Mockery, not respect. Julian looked around, seeing the faces of the people he had tried to impress now twisted in disgust. He was a fraud, caught in a trap set by the daughter he had treated as a pawn. "You," he hissed, his hand raised in blind rage. Beatrice moved faster than I had ever seen. She stepped between us, her height intimidating, her ice-blue eyes lethal. "Touch her, and I will ensure the banks don't just take your firm, Julian. I will ensure they take your name. Security, show this man to the gate. He is no longer a guest. He is a footnote." As security led him away, he looked back. He didn't see a girl. He saw the architect of his ruin. The sweet revenge was complete. He was leaving into the alpine night with nothing. We walked out onto the private balcony. The cold air was a relief. Beatrice reached out and took my hand. Her fingers were no longer cold. They were warm, solid, and she didn't let go. "You were perfect," she whispered. "I had a good teacher," I replied, leaning my head against her shoulder. The soft romance of the moment was built on a foundation of iron. We didn't need the world's approval. We were the law. The silence that followed Julian's removal was not the empty silence of a vacuum, but the heavy, expectant quiet of a room that had just witnessed the birth of a new era. The gala continued below us, a muffled hum of strings and expensive conversation, but out on the balcony, under the watchful gaze of the silver moon, the world felt localized to the few feet of stone between Beatrice and me. The sweet revenge had tasted like iron and ozone, but the aftertaste was something softer, something that didn't have a name yet. Beatrice didn't move her hand from mine. Her grip was a silent anchor. For a woman who had spent 40 years building a fortress around her heart, this small gesture of physical connection was more profound than any grand declaration. She looked out over the valley, where the lights of the village twinkled like fallen stars. "They will call us many things tomorrow, Claire," she said, her voice a low, melodic rasp. "They will call us ruthless. They will call us cold. They will say we are a scandal, that the Fontaine legacy will struggle to absorb." "Does it matter?" I asked, looking at her profile. The morning light was still hours away, but she already looked like she was carved from the dawn. "We have the truth, and we have the pastures." Beatrice turned to me, and for the first time, she allowed the cold CEO mask to drop completely. Her ice-blue eyes were no longer sharp. They were deep, reflective, and filled with a terrifyingly beautiful vulnerability. She reached out with her free hand and brushed a stray lock of hair behind my ear, her thumb lingering on the frame of my glasses. "It matters, because for the first time in my life, I am not the only warden of this fortress," she whispered. "I spent my life waiting for a successor who could think like me. I didn't expect to find someone who could feel for me. You didn't just save the Rossi name tonight, Claire. You saved the woman behind the desk. The romanticism of the moment was thick. built on the shared trauma of our pasts and the shared victory of our present. There was no need for overt displays. The way she looked at me, as an equal, as a partner, as someone precious, was more than enough. I realized that my father had brought me here to be a slave to his debt, but Beatrice had given me the keys to my own soul. "I'm not leaving, Beatrice," I said, my voice steady. "The archives are finished, but the future of the Fontaine-Rossi alliance is just beginning." A faint, genuine smile, the kind that never reached the boardroom, touched her lips. "I was hoping you'd say that. We have work to do. The board will try to challenge the trust. The banks will try to renegotiate. But they don't realize that the ice has finally begun to move." She leaned in, her forehead resting against mine for a fleeting second. It was a gesture of absolute intimacy, of velvet discipline that had transformed into a velvet bond. The scent of cedarwood was all I could breathe. "Welcome home, Claire," she murmured. We walked back into the ballroom, but we didn't join the crowd. We walked through them, two figures in dark velvet and wine-red silk, moving as a single, unyielding force. My father was a ghost now, a memory of a man who thought power was something you took. He never learned that true power is something you build, stone by stone, with someone who knows exactly how to keep you warm in the frost. As we reached the grand staircase, Beatrice stopped and looked down at the empire she had ruled alone for so long. She squeezed my hand one last time, before letting go to reassume her position of authority. But the look she gave me over her shoulder was one of pure, soft devotion. The cold CEO was gone. In her place was an architect of a new world. And as the first light of Saturday morning broke over the Alpine ridge, turning the snow into liquid gold, I knew that the silence of the Fontaine Palace would never be lonely again. We weren't just the law. We were the light. And for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was meant to be. Off the record. In the light. Together. The record of the Rossi family wasn't lost in a fire. It was being written now, in the steady, rhythmic heartbeat of a woman who had finally found her core. And as we walked into the dawn, I knew that the city girl was dead. Long live the shadow of the mountain. We were the most important record in the history of this forest, and we weren't going anywhere.